Side, you could
I wanted
turn
coffee,
that.
but I was like, I
Like,
can't,
it was
the
should've
mask
been
and the
three,
coffee, I
and
said, I'll
that
just wait till
one
afterwards.
bill,
Yeah.
we were
But,
down to
no,
one.
you can't eat totally fast.
I did, man.
Anyway, that's if you. That's part of the reason why I didn't put. I wasn't more specific.
Is
was
there-
because of that? They didn't have. They were very clear.
There's some corporate.
You know, I think with our kids, you got to show that this is important. I think my presence,
I don't know.
really what I would listen to everybody.
Four, 6, 8.
In there,
Still no quorum.
and that's the reason. I drive from my house. If I see one on patrol, you can believe I'm going 60 all the way home. Because that presence, yeah. Okay, so I'm with you. I do want to make sure in the future we raise the issue of the number of like the units. I'm not going to say homeless units, but the affordable housing units that are being put in central areas be factored in.
Good evening. I'll now call the Facilities Master Plan to order. Please take the roll.
Chair Negron,
Here.
Manny Clark, Sheila Eubanks,
President.
Naya Hanks is excused, Stephen Hardwick,
Here.
Madison Hughes is excused, Thomas Knosman is excused, Charity Martin King, D. Medina Cortez, Luanza Moore, Carl Moore Jr., Safi Miyoki,
Here.
Hafsa Musa, Elena Scales,
Oh, Lafina Meeks,
Present.
present.
Julia Lynn Walker,
Present.
Cecily Winjamo, James White,
Here.
Tiffany White.
Present.
Well, thank you. And my fellow volunteers, I definitely want to thank you. I want to thank you for all your efforts, your intellect, and the work that it's taken us to get to the place that we are right now. You know, as I've had several conversations with several of you, you know, as a community volunteer, it's always an honor to be put in a position where you could try to bring people together to come to a decision, to do what's best, not just for the community today, the community for the future. And as the district has pointed to the North Star, which is a portrait of the graduate, what we are trying to do is then support that North Star with what our thoughts are on how that facilities master plan would support the vision of a portrait of the graduate. So at this point, we do not have a quorum, so I'd like to have Dennis do a presentation from Leggett Architects, and then we'll go into the open discussion around the recommendation to the Board of Education.
Committee members, Dr. Dixon, Dr. James. Again, it's my pleasure to be here in front of you. My presentation tonight will be brief, as with most of the agenda for this evening will be the discussion amongst yourselves. Again, something that we've discussed from the very beginning about exercising grace. Give everyone an opportunity to voice their opinion, remain positive. We know that times are stressful right now. Acknowledge when we don't have an answer, considerate and respectful of your time, and everyone is together. Our 3 line items for our agenda this evening. I will review the process and summarize briefly a couple of the statistics behind our engagement, then the recommendation discussion amongst yourselves, and then the recommendation vote. The 6-step master plan began back in the spring of 2021. We had the gather phase, the envision phase, and the define phase, which we called problem defining. These were a series of online Zoom meetings with organized regionally with members in attendance discussing initially what their challenges and their successes within the school district, and then analyzing and discussing the 6 attributes of a portrait of a graduate. Then starting in the fall of 2021, at the onset of the school year, we began what we call the problem solving. Again, we had a series of questions for the problem defining. We went into what we thought were the challenges of the situations within Columbus City Schools, and then how can schools enhance the portrait of a graduate. And not only thinking of it facilities, but the main aspect was how can facilities support students becoming successful and, as we've termed, portrait ready. Then starting in the fall, we had our anticipate phase, which we had a series of tours within some existing facilities. There were newer facilities that were toured, and then adjacent next to them were a newer facility. And that way we got to show what the challenges were within some of our older facilities and how they can represent the attributes of a portrait of a graduate. In October, we started our consider phase, which were the simulations. Many of you participated in these throughout the district. We had a series of 8 engagement sessions, and we had over 500 simulations performed throughout the city. And then the transform phase, which we explored the data that came from our simulations, basically presenting options that were representative of the majority of folks, of what they've told us within the simulation sessions, of where we thought new facilities or renovated facilities could be within Columbus City Schools. Then we had a series of engagements in each of the middle school and high schools. We had nearly 1,000 participants, as you can see, 934, and nearly every high school and middle school represented. We had virtual family engagement sessions that we participated in, showing what the simulation sessions were about and encouraged attendance. And then we had other community associations that we reached out to. Between March and December of 2021, we had 112 engagement activities and 1,947. Those are calculated, but with virtual sessions, people come in and out. So we've had many opportunities for the community, staff, and students to reach out to the committee and to Leggett Architects and to the district. What were the key themes? We're using these as guiding lights. Basically, what were the community, the students, and the staff telling us? First one, the facility master plan process has shown that Columbus City Schools has too many schools to support the current student population. Secondly, current individual facility student population does not meet the current OFCC requirements for funding. What that means is that the current status of the occupancy within our current facilities is too small to receive funding. So that was something that was definitely brought out over the course of the simulations, that if we wanted to utilize state funding, we had to think bigger beyond the walls of our existing facilities. And then lastly, Columbus City Schools students' voice has expressed a need for improved facilities that support the 6 attributes of the Portrait of a Graduate. These were themes that were presented in nearly every simulation and every engagement session that we have hosted. Now the recommendation. What the part of your discussion will be this evening is, of the data that we've presented over the past engagements, we've shown approximate locations and sizes and quantity of new schools within the district. So an idea of what your recommendation could possibly look at is how many of new high schools and what their population would be. Over the data represented, the majority is 6 is the number reached from the engagement process, but we would ask that you recommend a number. And the size of the school must be a minimum of 1,200 students. Same procedure for the middle schools. 6 is the number reached from the engagement process, but we ask that if you have a different number in mind. And then 800 students is the minimum size. For elementary schools, 7 is the number reached from the engagement process. Again, we ask that if you have a different number in mind, so please discuss that amongst the group, and that the size of the new schools must be at least 600 students. There were also many advisory items that have come up over the course of our series of engagements. The attendees of these engagement sessions, we called these the parking lot issues. So the items that we could not answer at that particular point in time, but have been brought to our attention as very important items that either need further clarification or discussion, either within faculty and staff of Columbus City Schools or amongst the committee. And you can see that there is a series of them. And all of these have been discussed at length over the course of the 2021 engagement process. And then the other major component about continuing with the advisory items are the strategic partnerships, whether they be local organizations such as Columbus Rex and Park, food pantries, performing arts centers, or community health centers. The idea of community partnerships was deemed very important as the facility master plan process moves forward. Something that the Board of Education has brought to our attention that is very much a center alongside and parallel with the Portrait of a Graduate is supporting the whole child and the whole family. So utilizing these partnerships to really strategize to support that. So our next steps. We are still awaiting our enrollment projections from the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. We received word this past week that we are hoping either this week or next we will have those, and that will tell us what is the amount, how many students can be funded or is anticipated to be funded within this master plan process. Along with that, the OFCC will tell us their strategies. We know the size and depth and breadth of this master plan will be needing segments and phases, and the state will help us plan out what those phases will be so each of the plan can be handled in smaller financial increments. And that leads into the third point of what is that first segment of this facility master plan going to be? How many schools can it be? So after your recommendation is provided, we're going to use that information to work in concert with the OFCC to come up with what project will be first, and that will be a portion of what the committee and the Board of Education lead to. And something to keep in mind with facility master plans, they are living documents. Enrollments change, school curriculums change, programs change. Everything that is part of a master plan is a fluid process. So please know that whatever number that you discussed tonight for example, the number of high schools, that could change based upon the enrollment because this is, after all, a 25-year plan. This is going to be an ebb and flow process as we move from start to finish. And as more data is collected, the plans will evolve. So if we have an influx, if we have an influx of young students in 10 years, then that means the number of kindergarten students will rise, which means that we have to maybe possibly build another elementary school. Those are the types of fluid items that are within a master plan. So our projected timeline, the engagement has been completed. The master plan is to be approved by the Board of Education in June of this year. We'll have a ballot issue in November. And then August of 2026 is the approximate time of when the first new facility would be taking place. So any programming changes, any changes from grade banding, all of the discussions that we've come up with, that's the timeline that we're talking about when this first would start taking place. And then 20 years from now is when the anticipated completion of the entire process. So again, this is a generational investment. We're planning for generational change. And as far as the Leggett team, since we have completed engagement, we are still working with the members of Columbus City Schools in their communication with the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. So we will still be involved throughout this year. The master plan book, basically the summary of the report, will be presented in phases throughout different staff and administration throughout Columbus City Schools, but we'll have something to the board by early spring. So with that, if there are any questions, I'll be happy to field them. If not, then Chairman Negron, table is yours.
Yeah, so just going around, is there any questions? Go ahead. Hey, what's up? How you doing? Any questions for Dennis? Oh,
I have a question. Should I ask now?
Yeah.
I have a question about population size when it comes to overall high school, middle school, elementary. Do you guys have a total number for each of those citywide?
There's a couple of different things. The minimum, the state has given us minimums of what can be funded.
Right.
But when it comes to the regional, a lot of the demographics information, enrollment projection information we'll be getting from the state is going to tell us how big a school in this region needs to be.
Gotcha.
We do have enrollment data, or at least attendance data, so we know where the students are living. We have an approximate idea of what size of a facility would be needed in certain portions of the city. They do range, but not drastically. So the numbers that we've been analyzing anywhere between, so the low end would be 1,200 to 1,400 students, and the high end would be 1,800 to 2,000 students.
anyone else?
I do have a question. To piggyback on his question, in our meeting that we had, we brought up the fact of the affordable housing complex that are going up within the city. Perfect example, further down on High Street, that unit will be open early spring. I think that's something like maybe 400 family units up to 4 bedrooms. On Daring, you know, what I'm getting at is the city giving you numbers of projected affordable housing complex that they see, that they know is going to be built in the city of Columbus, that can be factored in.
Yes, the
That
enrollment
number.
projections that are provided are what they call a 10-year projection, excuse me. What they are looking at is development trends throughout the city, and they are also analyzing where new building is happening. And so to answer your question, yes, those items are in consideration in the enrollment projections that we will be given.
I do think it's important, though, of course, I'm in the building industry, and I have had the advantage of watching and building from plans. A master plan is a living document, and it's just it's the 10,000-foot look at what you're trying to do. There are other phases of planning and execution that happen that dive into much little level of detail, and then the most current data is used when you get to those next phases. So, we're looking at, like the portrait of the graduate is the big idea. That's our North Star, okay? What we're trying to do is create what's the focus of the North Star as it relates to the big idea. We're in big ideas, and, you could make an argument that that whole list of other things that came up were out of our call of action, but we're bringing them in, saying, "Hey, these are important things that we want you to consider when you're doing that." So, we're really, and it's hard as a human, if you're not a big planner, to come up with big ideas, right? I mean, we're all detailed people, right? It's like baking a cake. I'm not a baker, but you got to look at the recipe and go in detail. Well, we're not doing that. We're not baking the cake right now. We're coming up with big ideas, and that is counterintuitive to, how we approach life. So, to me, we have the information and the data today. We make a decision based on the information we have, and we expect the leaders of the district to, continue to update that data and information so that they're real time adjusting to it as they're building facilities. We're going to double in population here in Central Ohio. We have concepts of where we're going to double. I moved here in '88, and the city's blown up in areas where no one even thought they were going to, grow. So, and I'm comfortable, me personally, saying the basis of our decision is on the data that we have today, and here was the big idea, and then it's up to the district then to execute, and as they're executing, the professionals then dig in and get that same level of detail. And I could tell you, as a professional, we look at all of this stuff all over. As if we were involved in the execution of a portion of a master plan, all the data then would be collected again, and all the numbers would be collected, and that would help influence the next level. But for us, we have to rely on the information that's accurate that we have. And then the wisdom of, like, the OFCC, there's nothing perfect, but there's wisdom in certain classrooms. I mean, building sizes for, administrative costs, ability to offer programs. I know I want the students in Columbus City Schools to have opportunities, the same opportunities that I had. I don't want it to be limited. And then you start to need, you need a building that's so big so that then the district can afford to put all those programs in. So I'm just saying that this is going to be, our decision today helps inform the board's decision with the master plan. And then as they start to execute, and the demographics change or development trends change, there's a big push for low-income housing, and then hopefully that continues to have an impact on our community in a positive way, and that's going to change, the number of students in a certain area, So. Good question, though. Sorry for the long dialogue about it, but it's a good question. Any other questions?
Is there a recommended grade class size from City of Columbus schools when it comes to those larger number school systems?
You're talking about students
Per grade level.
per grade level?
I mean, a recommendation from Columbus City Schools that say, hey, if you're gonna, we'd love the ideal class number or school grade per class size. Well, no, I mean like overall, like grade. So if on the west side you go through the whole system, your class size roughly is around like 300 for your whole entire graduating class. Does the city have does the city have something like that when it comes to the recommendation is, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm just trying to do the quick math in my head about what the typical size of a graduating class is going to look like when it comes to a 2,000 population size high school And whether or not I need to adjust my number of recommendations when it comes to new high schools based off that. So if you're going to build a 2,000 capacity high school, that means that there are going to be X number of graduating students in that class. So therefore, if we build, instead of 6 schools, we build 7, that reduces the overall total number of students in that building from the 2,000 down to maybe 1,600, and then therefore reduces the total number of students in that graduating class.
To answer your question, the idea of what is the ideal graduating class size, that has not been particularly discussed. What has been discussed were a lot of the advisory items of what is anticipated and expected within these newer, larger facilities. And something else that I know the board has expressed to me to discuss amongst the groups when we've been in our engagement and partnering sessions is that the school sizes that we're presenting, they're big for Columbus in how it compares to the existing conditions. But they are not exceedingly big high schools in the realm of the state of Ohio. The idea of building a 1,400, 1,600, 1,800 student high school is, if you look in central Ohio, that is pretty much where the school sizes are in comparison.
What you did actually pull data from not just central Ohio, the region, and across the country, and that's consistent with that. So it's not just central Ohio, not just Ohio, not just the Midwest region. You pulled it across the country.
Correct. But to answer the idea of the ideal class size, no, it's not been presented. But one thing I would like to note is that something that is something of a misconception with the bigger schools is that when we've been involved with some of the teachers, they've been saying, oh no, I'm going to have to teach 60 kids. And that's not what this means. It means that we're providing more spaces for more teachers. We're not providing more students per teacher. The square footages allotted are based upon a 1 to 25 student teacher ratio.
And just for clarification, I don't have anything against bigger schools. I'm just in my head if we're going to make a recommendation of 6, like I'm just trying to do the math, the quick math. Because I graduated from a high school that had, I think, 400 in my graduating class. So when I went to a local high school on the west side, I was very shocked when I saw a framed portrait of every single graduating high school senior in that class fitting in just a normal, like, 15 by 20 frame. And I was like, wow, it must be really nice to know your fellow colleagues like that close that you guys all fit in one frame. But I enjoyed a bigger school, so I'm just trying to, again, do the quick math on my end. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep. Thank you. So you were all sent the meeting minutes for the 12/10/21 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the 12/10 meeting?
So moved.
Okay, without objection, the meeting minutes are approved. Also, since we did not have a quorum the last meeting, and we have a meeting minutes from the 11/18, 6/30, 21, 5/26, 21. Do I have a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the 11/18, 21, 6/30, 21, and 5/26, 21 meetings?
So moved.
Thank you. Without objection, the meeting minutes are approved. So now we'll go into our open discussion. And Dennis, I do appreciate you summarizing that discussion. And I know there's, I sent out an email. Dennis went through that information. What I'd like to do then is if we could, I believe in kind of straw polls, and no one's being put on the spot. We're going to make a decision using the collective intellect of the group. So, Dennis, if you could pull up the summary recommendations, if you don't mind, so that everyone can see them. And let's go through and just kind of get thoughts. And Hafsa, since you just got here, we'll start this way. And we'll get, so that we don't, give you time to kind of process your thoughts. So, how do I pronounce your name? Safi. Just wanted to make sure. You want to just kind of go through and get your thoughts, and we'll go around the table this way and see what you think about the three thoughts and what you had in your mind in regards to what they might be?
Well, looking at the numbers between the number of high school, middle school, and elementary, I think 7 being the number for elementary schools threw me off a bit because I was like, it's weird if you think about it because I'm thinking if they have 6 schools in each region, but then if you think about the elementary, they'll just have one random school somewhere different than those 2 other high schools and middle schools. So I don't know if 7 really is the right choice for the number of elementary schools, but that's just my opinion.
Steve?
And I think there needs to be some flexibility in there, not just saying we want this number of high schools, but as I talked about some of you earlier, I think we should put something in there that says that that they should have the flexibility to combine buildings, build centralized buildings where they can combine citywide programs, because it's not our job to decide what citywide programs should be kept citywide, but we should make sure that there is some space for that. And some of those schools have different grade bandings. So I'm concerned that if we just say X number of this, X number of that, X number of this, without saying that some of that should be set aside for centralized that they should give the board, we should give the board some flexibility to decide which centralized programs to keep, which ones make sense to do citywide, then that's what I would like to see in there. It's hard. That's, yeah. Otherwise, it's fairly. I do the one thing, the only thing I came across with the consensus was that people are willing to support bigger schools. Other than that, we had a wide variety of things. People would come in, I like this program because my kids did it. Well, my kid didn't go there. I don't like it, or I don't know anything about that program. I'm going to vote to close it. I think we need to create some flexibility for them to decide in the future what programs to keep. And I think centralized programs work because if you have a 500, if you have a language immersion program that needs 500 kids to be viable, well, you cannot do immersion all over the city, because if you can teach language all over the city, you can't do immersion all over the city. You need a certain number or else you're not immersed. Well, maybe there's only 500 for that. Well, there's 500 over here for this other program and 200 for this program, and all of a sudden we have a 1,200 high school. Anyway, that's what, so I thought, I thought we should add something along the lines of, we recommend that some of the buildings be placed so as to create flexibility to allow the district to host multiple citywide programs in the same facilities.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
I'm next. So I'm concerned with this number 7 for elementary. And when we were looking at all of the elementary maps, there were about 5 elementaries in the north quadrant of the city of Columbus, whether it's northeast, northwest, just north period. So if you're going to replace 5 schools, I'm just looking at equity. That only leaves 2 schools, 2 elementaries somewhere east, west, or south. And when we're talking about equity and making sure that we're providing the appropriate services for our kids, those with special abilities or special needs, I'm a little concerned with that number. So I guess my question is, can we pop up the most popular elementary, middle, and high to count and make sure we're right with that number 7 and 6 and 6?
Let's we'll let everyone kind of
Okay.
get their initial thoughts, and then we'll figure out how we're going to move from there. Okay, is that okay?
Yep, that's
Just I
fine.
want to make sure that I capture what everyone's.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Yep.
be clear.
Okay.
Cool. So, I think 6 might be just a little low for high school, middle school, and the 7 is also throwing me off Just it seems like there's going to be one region that gets 2 elementary schools. Again, that's population size. It's probably needed. That's fine. It's just 6 high schools at a current rate of 13,000 enrolled students leaves 2,182 students in 6 facilities. It's just based off current math that I was able to pull. So
Well,
maybe we bump those numbers up.
I do want to emphasize that these numbers that are showing here are representative of the new buildings
Right.
that will be built.
Gotcha.
And if you look at the current facilities that have already been built throughout the district, there have been 7 high schools that have been constructed through the master plan. So those schools, when they might change grade banding, those discussions, but we're talking about just the new buildings.
Right.
In elementary schools right now, there's been 36 new elementary schools funded through the master plan.
Gotcha.
So when you look at the existing facilities, you mentioned about how there's really not been any built in the north. That's correct, because most of the elementary school construction has been to the west, the south, and east. So these are just representative of the new buildings of where they can be. Or not where they can be, but how big they'll be, but just the number of buildings that will be funded throughout the next phase of the master plan. So it wouldn't be 6 total, it would just be the
Yeah,
new.
sorry. The numbers to me are what I care about the most, just when it comes to overall, it just, in my head, I'm, again, just trying to do the quick math of how many students with a population growth that we're expected to have is going to be crammed into these new buildings. And therefore, should we, right now, just round each one of those up to at least a minimum, or at least change the verbiage to a minimum of 6, and 7, just so that we are, again, making the recommendation that, like, we still need these schools and we can't not have the 6 and the 7, I mean. So again, I apologize, but I'll rest for now.
Okay, I am, one, I understand the funding issues. And it's important that we not see this as a tail wagging the dog kind of situation, because the funds are needed. And in order to get the funds through OFCC, we have to increase the building size. Given that, it's important then to understand that the building is simply a structure that serves as a conduit for a product, and that product is the graduate. And so it's really important in the discussion to be able to lead with what the students who come through the process, how this process will benefit them, how then they will benefit the community, and how that will help to grow us as a whole. I'm a 3rd-generation resident of Columbus. When I look back at the 3 or 4 schools that I attended, and one, because my mother insisted, my parents both said, because she had attended one, and it's got a new building. The old is gone, the new building. 2 of the other elementary schools are special programming. When I came through in the 50s and 60s, there was no special programming. You went through 1 through 6, that was it. You went to middle school or junior high.
Junior high.
And then you went on. So I think this is a unique opportunity to create structures that will help to facilitate the growing interest in all these other kinds of programs that will help to benefit our students going forward. And so, yes, the motivation is OFCC. The money is absolutely needed for the community. But how do we then do this in a way that helps to grow our students? And for me, that's the bottom line. And for that, then, as we go forward, I accept the recommendation as presented, but encourage, the board in particular, then, to listen to the community as these changes occur, and hear their voice and help them to facilitate the culture within the school. So the kind of issues that James is raising, you really do have some sense of community within the school. You really do have a connection to the community outside the school. You really have substantial partnerships with corporate interests, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Just clarification on James. Pretty much what you're saying is you just additional word into the verbiage that is up there as in a minimum of, right? Is that what I understood you
I mean,
to
I think
say?
looking at a big picture now, I was in my head confusing myself, but I do support what is recommended. I just, again, given the expected population boom that some of our lower end areas that are already experiencing might might influence a lot more when it comes to developing up even nicer areas, quote unquote. So just I'd like to plan on the safe side and say that we just recommend one of each more when it comes into a high school, middle school, and elementary. Just so I think that Columbus is going to see a lot bigger population boom than we're expecting, but that's just from my own.
I can tell you, like the schools that we're building, I just did school in Gahanna and two in Dublin. The sizes of the schools are they're not any different than what's being done here. So that there's nothing that was the intellectual work and the math behind it is consistent with what's happening. And if anyone had a chance to go through some of the tours of the buildings, and we toured a building that we didn't build. It was Arlington School, the one that I was at. I think you were there with me, right? I can't remember who was there. But anyway, it's just if you went through one of those newly built facilities, that the square footage and the numbers work, but what they've done to school construction on the inside kind of blows your mind in regards to the creative space that's there, and that's what we want for our students. So my only point in saying that is all the numbers that were presented, and it's all arithmetic, to be honest with you. It's square footage, it's number of students, and for me, from a business person, right, I'm going to build a building and invest in that's going to pro forma, it's going to work, it's going to cash flow. Well, with a school, there's administrative costs that support students, and you have a certain size, and that literally reduces your overhead, if you would, but allows you to have more opportunity. That's the way I see it. So, unfortunately, you weren't here for all the presentations to see some of the data that we saw with all the numbers, but it's very consistent with what I see in my world, with number of students and square footage. And I don't want to talk about what district did it, but there was a district that needed to build 2 buildings, and they didn't build the most modern, state-of-the-art facility because they just needed to build a building where we're not going to have to do that. We're going to be able to do something that's tailored to that path of the portrait of the graduate and create that really creative, innovative space. And that's why the numbers do matter. Square footage of building, number of students, and then all of that stuff does, because it supports it. There's statistics that are behind that irrefutable, but anyway. So, sorry for
And
the
me,
long-
myself, I love the idea of the big, campus style school. I drive to Honda every day and pass Marysville High School, and that is a true campus. And I love the idea of that. And coming in and at our meeting, there really wasn't question on the number of new builds. That didn't come up. So, I had to go with per our conversation and listening to, everybody. I'm pretty fine with, we got to start somewhere.
Do you, the Honda Innovation Center, the new corporate facility that they put there?
Uh-huh.
That new, I mean, just the way that building was built. An office building would have been built 10 years ago very different. It had that open space, collaborative space. The identity of Honda was put there. That's why they put the museum there, right?
Heritage Center, yeah.
Right. They did that. So those kind of principles are put into the education today. More light, more flexible space, more. So, but still the numbers are there, right? So many students, so much square footage, all of those things then become important.
Right. Oh, yes, I definitely support what is recommended. Walking or being a part of this process, from the beginning, and
being able to experience, doing some of the tours, also participating in some other regions and seeing some of the redevelopment and some of the changes that need to be. There's definitely a lot. Families, our staff, everyone has their opinions on the matter. But not to get too much into kind of what everyone is saying, I think the overall goal, or like that North Star, like the portrait of a graduate, that is definitely what we're looking at, and this is part of the process. So this is about change. Our kids are changing, technology is changing. Like you said, when you were in school, things were different. And when I was in school, excuse me, things were different. I mean, my kids are learning more than I will ever, at a speed, I shouldn't say that, at a speed that just amazes me. So I think that moving toward a more creative way of teaching, I'm, coming out of that standardized way of learning, I think our kids are more in a creative atmosphere. And I think learning and technology needs to be aligned with that. So when it comes to the facilities master plan, I love to see all the efforts that go into creating the facilities, the square footage, the capacity of the kids, the flexible furniture, the creative space, the open space. I mean, it is so wonderful to see where kids can just have that freedom to explore more than I think where we've come from as far as learning. But this is a process. I mean, I think, like I said, going through these phases, we've had conversations about the pros and the cons, but we know that we have to move forward. We have to move forward with something, and I think that our leaders, our district leaders up to this point have definitely supported a lot of the changes that we're concerned about or that we want to see. So I definitely, like I said, I recommend just moving forward with the plan.
Yeah, and to bolt on, I really enjoyed the simulation that was done with the, with the school blocks, and that was.
Yeah.
Well,
Just touching it, yeah.
what happened was, right, that's right, because
Yeah.
it just all your sensory, as a human, you were just hitting it all. Your mind, your creative mind was there, and it was really interesting. And then when we got to see the work from all the different areas, and you really, it started to cut a path of what our North Star would start to look like. So to me, that was the one that was the aha moment for me. And then watching the community come together to do that was powerful for me, to be honest with you. It's one of the best memories I have about the process, to be honest with you. Just because it just was really where creativity and humanity came together to try to solve a problem. And the tools that were used were basic, but it was so impactful. The professionals that we hire, I really, commend them and respect what they did, because you took a process that was so foreign to us and, not foreign to me, but it was still to the community, and then brought it to its simplistic form. It was impressive. So thank you for sharing that. Annie?
For the most part, I agree with what we already have here. My interest, as I've been talking about before, is an opportunity for the young people, an opportunity for the communities. So I'm very excited to see what new programming can exist in these buildings, and I'm very excited to see the partnerships. I'm partial to Rec and Parks, so hopefully, Rec and Park can share some of these spaces, but as many other opportunities as possible, so that we won't have a similar scenario right now where we just have parents and whole communities and kids who just don't know what's possible. That's the part that I really, really hope this gets away from. And the bigger school, to me, is the answer for that, because it'll allow for different communities to kind of merge and, kind of
teach each other certain things in terms of socialization that we just don't have right now.
Yeah. And it's getting worse right now with the COVID situation, and the disconnect
Yeah.
that we have, right? I mean, that's really concerning. That is concerning to me today, what this pandemic is doing to us as humans and humanity and disconnecting us. So it's making it even tougher. You bring up a very important point. And we were talking about it earlier. You know, these facilities we're talking about are not just schools. You know, they're a sanctuary to a lot of students. They're a
Yes.
place where they come and they're eating, right? And they feel safe. And so there's and then hopefully what you're saying is then you really connect with the student in other ways that are really important.
Well,
Has to be part of that.
Well, one of the things that I strive in my everyday is to get a lot of my participants head out of their internal community so they can see some other things and be exposed to some other things. And to me, the larger schools will actually do that in a similar fashion
agree
to
with
what
that.
you're talking about.
I agree with that completely. Last but not least, hopefully you had a chance to get your thoughts together.
So I'm going off of what I've heard so far. And okay, so the plan seems solid enough. And I'm not really discouraging the idea of larger facilities with a smaller number of schools, but I haven't seen any like solid plans when it comes to embedding the opportunities that some smaller schools have, like specialties that aren't exactly labeled. Like in certain schools, they have either better engineering programs or better arts programs, but it's not a specifically art school or engineering school. And it's harder to do that without, in a larger facility, without the distinction between schools. I don't know, but it's something I observed with smaller schools throughout Columbus City schools, and I haven't seen in larger schools in other areas of Ohio. And those benefits, it'll be easy for those benefits to be lost through larger facilities, but that's mainly the only concern I have with the idea. Otherwise, it sounds pretty solid in my opinion.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate everybody's comments. Dennis, I don't know if you could help. There was I made some statements and just wanted to, maybe get your perspective on some of the questions about the numbers and the schools and the 6 and 7 schools, if you don't mind. I heard, you heard a lot of comments.
Yes.
And what I didn't want to do was just go ahead and answer everything because we heard some themes, but I think those are the biggest themes that we heard that I thought we needed to maybe
Yes.
perspective on.
What we have on the screen now is concept 2 of this is an example of the elementary board. So the schools that you see within the west, south, and east that are represented by the blocks shown in color, those are the existing facilities that have already been built. You'll see some schools that are to the north and a couple to the west that are circled with an orange and yellow highlight. Those are where those numbers are coming from. So the concepts that were presented through phase 6 were representative of how many times we were told the story through the simulations that this is where the schools would be and how big they would be. Something that I would like to comment in response to the commentary of the group is that the number of schools isn't necessarily the hard line factor. It's more of, in response to you too, is how big do we want these schools to be? The understanding of, and the number of schools will be adjusting as enrollment projections are given. At each segment of our master plan to receive state funding, we have to go through another series of enrollment projections. And something to keep in mind too is that, yes, our city is growing, but what previous enrollment projections have shown us, and the last time we've got them was as early as 2016, is that student enrollment within Columbus City Schools has been pretty steady, hasn't had a lot of great influx, hasn't had a lot of great decrease. It's been pretty level, even though the population of Columbus has grown quite a bit. So please keep that in mind too, is that yes, the enrollment projections will be addressing different changes within the city. But a lot of, just because we have a high increase in population growth doesn't necessarily mean student enrollment within Columbus City Schools. So yes, to get back to the numbers, this is just an example. So the numbers that were presented, and again, it is a little challenging to understand the big breadth of what that means in a couple of phrases, but it's a written explanation of the representation of what we received within the data of the simulations into presenting the concepts, the collective concepts within phase 6. So the simulations were phase 5, and then the concept presentation, which was the collection of the data, the majority data that was given to us of how big a school should be, approximate geographic location, and you can just by the count of number of schools that were presented within the simulation.
That was helpful for me.
So the schools that so that basically means, back to James, your question in particular, the high schools that have been built, those are going to remain. So it's not like all of the students would be within just 6 new buildings. It would be the high schools that have already currently been funded, plus these other additional ones. Any other comments that I can help with?
No, I think that was helpful.
Thank you.
Well, team, so there's an African proverb that says you eat the elephant one bite at a time. So I'm going to try to bite the elephant one at a time, okay? And I'm going to try to bite it with the low-hanging fruit. Is that okay? The best I can. As long as there's some papaya, mango there, I'll be okay.
As long as there's some pepper.
Oh, Lordy, I love you, just so you know. She's got spice in her.
Yes.
It's like cayenne pepper, you know? I love it. So anyway, so if we go to, like, we're just going to, the first recommendation, let's just look at the population, the student population. You know, so it says that the information, 1,200 students or more. Do we have a consensus with that? Right? Okay, yes?
Yes.
Right, straw poll, so we could put 1,200 there, right? And then the middle schools, right, we'll say the middle schools with populations of 800 students or more, right? Okay. And then elementary schools of 600 students or more.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. So now we'll go to the number of new buildings, which I appreciate, Dennis, you clarifying that with everyone. So it's saying the number 6 has been reached. Is that an acceptable number with this group?
No.
Yes.
Can that number be fluid like we were talking about before?
Say it again.
That number is still fluid according to this plan. It can go up or down for population.
I mean, just think about, listen to this, right? We all saw Amazon was thinking about Columbus, right?
Yeah.
If Amazon would have hit Columbus, that's a game changer for us, right? Because it's not just bringing the number of people there for the jobs, it's all the residual effect with that. So yeah, this is today with the information that we have, right?
Question, do we know how many students we need to accommodate in these buildings?
This minimum.
No, but the total number of students
Like each
that need
building.
to be accommodated in the new buildings for each of these levels.
Dennis, do you know that number? I know we did it in the simulation, so the simulation produced that, Steve. I don't know.
Number of students that need to be accommodated within new buildings. That's the question.
At each level, yeah.
At each level, I don't want to just go off, we have those numbers because we have the number of blocks counted. So I can provide that, I need a couple of minutes to go.
We did it in the we did it in the simulation, though.
Yeah,
That's what I'm saying. This
those
was an
numbers.
active, go ahead.
Yes. So right now, here's the high school, one of the high school concepts. So you can see we've got the schools up at the top, that would be the new facilities. And then looking at those Right now, we've got yeah, so I would say comfortable saying about half the high school population right now, and I think and it's up there. We want to, if they can possibly zoom in on some of that data, but that was what was presented at the simulation.
And what's the high school graduate population right now?
That 13,457.
Yeah, and this, you said this would be about half, and that would,
7,596 need to be built.
No.
so from a master planning standpoint, the math works. The arithmetic works.
I think it should be 7.
Then it doesn't work.
Well, the math for the West Side and Region 1 is that 2 high schools will be closing. If you build 1 new facility, it'll average out to 450 students per graduating class.
So this recommendation
needs to
doesn't
be a
speak
little-
about the West Side. What this recommendation does is speak again, the North Star is the portrait of the graduate, right? This is the North Star. This is not, for me, I had to be agnostic to school names and districts, right? We're talking about big ideas here. Remember what I said? We're at 10,000 feet, right? We're not talking about CAS, and we're not talking about the West Side. We're talking about big ideas. There's going to be an entire group after us that will go into the details, will go into the planning, will go into programming. That's not what we do. That's right. So we're a big idea group, right? We're saying, hey, these are the big ideas.
I think on some of what he's bringing up, and I've heard from other people, we have an equity versus equality problem. We are going to have unequal schools because the south and east side are going to have smaller, more neighborhood-oriented schools, and some people really want that. And the north and west sides are going to have larger schools, less neighborhood-oriented, with probably better programming. And that's going to create a whole bunch of tensions within the district. A lot of people in the north are saying, well, look, we're going to lose like half our schools in this, maybe even more than that. And that's a concern for some people because the north isn't going to have neighborhood schools anymore after this. But we're going to have better programming. The south is going to have more neighborhood schools, but they're going to have less programming. And that's part of why I suggested still having some central area where people can get the more specialized programming you may not be able to get in the smaller, especially in the smaller schools, but even in some of the larger schools. So I still think it's at the appropriate time, I'd like to come back to my idea of adding the language about centralizing some of it.
So Jim, and maybe you can answer to both of you. If we increase the number for the number of high school students and still left it at 6, because you're building the space. If there's growth, or even if there isn't growth, there could be a specialty, like Hasfa was speaking of, that is the culture within that community that's needed, and now you have the space to have that programming. I know we're not talking about programming, but kind of big picture, and when I think about the middle school piece, I think about Woodward Park and then Woodward at Walden, which is well over 800 students if you build a middle school. So you would need 2 technically somewhere in that quadrant to even address the kids at one school. Do you know what I mean? So do we want to adjust? I agree with the minimum numbers, but maybe finagle them a little and keep the number of schools the same?
So
Do you know what I mean?
when you look at the number of students for high school, just using that as an example,
Okay.
and it's just simple math, what OCC funds, the exercise that we went through, you know, this is the big idea of what we're saying, based on the numbers, this is what we're recommending, 6 schools at minimum 1,200 students. We're not saying east side, west side, this school, that school programming. We're saying these are the big ideas that we're telling the district to do. And then, like what you're talking about would be part of the next phase of what the planning people would do whenever they decide, okay, we're gonna go after this. That, and that's where, as a human, when I was saying, it's hard to be a master planner. It's not easy, because what happens is, we all want to dive into the details, and it's human nature to try to get details. It's hard to come up with big concepts. That's why we're all not very creative. There's nothing against anyone here, right? You know, I love architects because they come up with creative ideas, because it's exactly what we all want to just dive into the details. You want to come up with, you know, the solution. You work for Honda, you know how it is. This Six Sigma stuff, everything is about problem solving and diving into details. This is not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to come up with, you know, really big concepts so that we can inform the district and say, these are as a community, these are fundamental important things to us.
Right. I appreciate that. I guess when we're looking at it, since we are both, quote, Northsiders, West Side has their concerns, South Side has their concerns, when we're getting this to the voters, because you have to have that buy-in. We can say, we're gonna build 5 2,000 capacity schools, and they're still going to look at that equity. That's why I said 7 looks problematic, but because yes, the North Side is not going to have community schools, they're going to have big schools on a grander scale, because of the funding source. You know, when some of the other schools were they built with 600 and 800 in mind, or were they built with 450? I mean, we have a school in my community that was built, and the maximum elementary was 450. So there's an equity piece there. Some will have 450, some will have 500, and then these other ones will have 6. Yes, they're newly constructed, but that programming piece still comes into play, and that equity piece of it. If we say 1,500 high school, we're going to address any influx of population, and not be back at the drawing board again and say, well, we have to do another master plan because this is where we're at today. You know what I mean? I mean, I know it's a living document, so you can adjust, but I think for some middle schools, you might need to say 1,000, not 800. And if that's based off of the OFCC dollars, then that's what it is. But we have to get the voters. I mean, it's great that we're doing all this work. It's going on a ballot in November. They have to feel like it's going to be equitable for all sides as well.
Right.
So I hate to throw the politics in it, but I mean, this is all for naught if we can't get it passed.
So if you think about what happens after we're done, and let's go on the premise that we have these numbers here and we're moving forward with this recommendation. There's still a lot of work for the board. The board's got to use this information to come up with you know, this is not the end of this is just a component of the decision that, you know, it's an important one, but the district has got to put together.
But it's that human factor that you spoke of, the devil's in the details,
Yeah.
and voters want the details.
Right. And I respect that, but that's not what we're doing.
Right, no.
That's not
I just
what
was
we're
asking
charged
if
to
we
do.
could adjust a little bit, but
And it's hard because, you know, honestly, you know, I had the privilege of working on the school closings committee, and I got to learn a lot about the passion of that, right? So,
Yes.
So I have perspective for not being a Columbus resident, right?
Yeah.
Right, chairing the school closings, I have perspective that an outsider normally wouldn't have, right? So I'm not naive to what it is. What I have to do though, right, anytime I'm charged with something, what was I asked to do? Right, and then, you know, take out of the equation the stuff that it's not. And then when I make that recommendation, right, I'm saying, you asked us to do this. And that's why we put the parking lot items on there and said, hey, look, you know, we want you to consider this. Because it's not that you know, Steve's comments aren't important, or, you know, other, you know, the challenges with different communities aren't, those are very important and they're relevant. They're part of who we are as Columbus. So that's why I'm saying, what were we charged to do? And then we could say, hey, look, you know, you have to keep this into consideration, because if you don't take that in consideration, then we will have a challenge with the ballot issue. So to me, what we recommend on number of building and students, I think, you know, I don't want to say that's the easy button, but it's, you know, it really is, to be honest with you. The challenge is all these other things that we want the Board of Education to take into consideration, and the passion of this group is very clear that those things are important. So, you know, all because we make this recommendation on 6 high schools, right, based on whether we are the numbers, but we have to say we got to make sure that there's equity, make sure that we don't, you know, dilute some of the things that are so special in some of these areas. You know, that's not what we were charged to do, but we're saying, hey, it's so important. These are the things that you need to take into consideration when along with our recommendation, you need to look at all these parking lot items, because they're important to us as a group. And then our voice would be heard, because then we're saying, right, just follow me along here. And, you know, Steve, because your note is just as important, Steve, so this is not excluding you, that we're going to recommend 6 high schools with 1,200 students, 6 middle schools with 800 students, 7 elementary schools with 600 students, right? That's what we're recommending, but we're saying, you know, read your statement, Steve. That would go into what we're saying is a parking lot item. Can you pull up the?
I'm hoping it's not a
other things to
Some of the
consider?
buildings be placed in order to create flexibility.
Yes, his
for citywide
flexibility.
programs.
And we talked about the
Yep.
consideration at lottery
Yeah.
schools, open enrollment, everything that you're stating is on the back of that
Right,
sheet.
and we're
that
saying,
gonna-
we're making these recommendations with these numbers, but we're
Right.
saying, along with that recommendation, we're saying to the Board of Education that this group here feels like these things are important also. So as you're going through with what we're recommending as the master plan, we're saying we want to, and then, you know, Steve, your comment, can you read your statement real quick?
Give me a sec. Somehow my pages document disappeared. It was something along the lines of.
I had it said that some of the buildings be placed to create flexibility to allow the district to host citywide programming that would be appropriate for the students.
Yeah, and that's no different than what Manny was saying about making sure that these, because he was saying Parks and Recs is something close to him, right? So we'll add that
Or
to,
even Hofstra in terms of.
Hofstra, yeah,
specific
no, right,
programs.
when she was-
Yeah,
After-
even what she was saying, we don't
Yeah.
want to lose that either.
yep.
Yeah.
So we're really saying the same thing,
Right.
right? I'm not,
Right.
so what we're saying, the thing that we were charged to, here go the numbers. But, right, we're saying to the district also, to the Board of Education, I apologize, because the board is what hired us, not hired us, asked us to volunteer, right? Sorry about that. Because the pay's not that good.
That's not
Actually, you
bad.
know what, the pay is good, you know that, because we'll see it down in the future.
It-
So, to me, that's what's really important, because what happens is this back page, right, that is the culture of who we are. This is, when we're community volunteers, this is where our voice says, hey, look, these are the other things that we want you to take into consideration. Good, Steve.
And I think, first of all, are you saying that language is now added to this?
I'm saying to our back page, the things that we want to make sure that,
We recommend that, so it still says we recommend.
But the school board moves
Yes,
forward.
yes. We recommend that some of the buildings be placed, right. In the back page, we would add the language, we recommend that some of the buildings be placed so as to create flexibility to allow the district to host multiple citywide programs in the same facilities. That would go in the back.
right,
Okay, yes, okay,
right, does that make sense?
yes. And
Because what I'm saying is, and I'm not trying to appease you, Steve, I'm thinking that's important, that's an important thing that we all were saying in our own different ways.
And maybe there's one thing that came up with them as well, maybe we should put on the back as well, is that the district needs to deal with the equity challenges of having larger, more diversified programming in some parts of town and smaller, more neighborhood schools in other parts of town. Because is very stark, the differences. And it's partly the last, I understand why we got this way, why the last plan did what it did, but it's created kind of a leapfrog situation, which is putting the district in a bind in the future, because you're having one part of town getting one thing and another part of town getting the other, and 30 years from now, it's going to be flipped. But anyway, I think that equity issue, I think the district needs to be aware of the issues that come from that. But I've heard good things both sides, and some people in the north are jealous of what the south has, and some people in the south are going to want to have what the north has. It's just different, and I don't know which. I know which one I prefer, but other people disagree with me on that.
Tell you which one no one agrees.
Have it on the back of number 3.
Okay.
Where you
Equity versus equality.
Yeah, when you talk about equity versus equality, I think that's encompassing what you're stating.
Okay.
And
I just thought that
do
maybe
you want it?
I thought maybe that's something worth specifying, because I think people are going,
Oh.
as this goes forward,
Okay.
that's going to be very remarkable at the bond issue, or anytime you go to the south, you're going to hear about how wonderful the north gets all these fancy new buildings, and you go to the north, they're going to say the south gets to keep all these wonderful neighborhood schools. And I think that's going to be an issue that's going to come up. 'Cause of course, everyone wants what the other person has.
Yep.
And if you don't want to, if I'm the only one who thinks that should be highlighted, I understand, but I've said my piece on that.
We like your piece.
I like your views.
So an effort not to be afraid to be wrong, right? So I'm looking for a motion to approve 6.
Can we go through the 3 recommendations real quick again?
That's what I'm doing right
Well, I mean, like, from the 3 models. I just want to, because didn't the models specifically state, like, how many, like, they each recommended for each grade level? Because I thought I saw 7 up on one of the concepts for high schools. 7 was recommended, and then one of the elementary ones also recommended 8 buildings. So I just wanted some point of clarification of the rounding.
At the end of the day, this was the.
So let me, again, this is, I'm gonna, at the efforts of not being afraid of being wrong, try to summarize. So we're recommending 6 new high schools with a population of over 1,200 students or more, 6 new middle schools with a population of 800 students or more, and 7 new elementary schools with a population over 600 students or more. And, we also understand that the next step to the master plan will be confirmed demographic OSCC funding strategies, identify the first segment of implementation. We also recognize that the facilities master plan is a living, breathing document that will evolve as more data and information are collected. The facilities master plan committee drafts advice to share with the Columbus City School Board. And I would emphasize that the importance of this information, which we'd find on the back page, we recommend the school board move forward with the research programming solutions and other parking lot issues is listed below: lottery schools, open enrollment, equity versus equality, immersive languages, information learning, gifted programs, athletics, arts, charter schools, safety and security, special programs and specialty schools, international programs, transportation, adult ed, career tech, early learning, special ed, special education, feeder systems, whole child focus, social and emotional learning, community partnerships. Can I get a motion? That motion?
So moved.
Okay. So, Misty, we have a motion. So,
And was Misty here to catch the language that was added to the back? Okay.
so without objection, that motion be approved?
Yeah, shouldn't you, you should, Robert's rule says you should call it roll on something.
Oh,
No, without objection.
I still think that the recommended number should all be up by
So
one.
you object.
Correct.
Okay, call the roll, Misty.
Oh, cool, I'm the only one here from Region 1. Can you come back to me?
No.
Okay.
agree, we agree? Approve?
Yeah.
Agree?
Agree.
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 Agree. Well, thank you. And hopefully, the district and the board understands the passion and commitment and dedication that this group had, and we take the comments that we had said and shared and carry that through to the next phase. I'm sure that there are other people that would be more than willing to volunteer to be involved during the next phase so that those things are implemented. So with that, it's been an honor to serve the district and the students for which will become our future leaders. My co-chairs, it's been an honor working with you. Hopefully, you know, I love to disagree as long as I'm not disagreeable. And the reason I say that is the human mind is so powerful. I've never solved a problem on my own, and I've never made a decision on my own. I love to work in a room where I build consensus, because we as a group, right, the IQ of this entire group is higher than the individual IQ of the smartest person in the room. And it's always, you know, a pleasure and honor to work with other people that are passionate and care about others more than they do, you know, themselves. And I think that that's what makes a community so great. And we have an opportunity as a community to become something really special. And that's why I love the Portrait of the Graduate, and I'll forever be behind what we're trying to do. So those future young minds, our future leaders, will have an opportunity to be in a building where they have opportunity. You know, the same opportunity that was afforded to me and to everyone in this room. So thank you, everyone. Everyone have a nice evening.
Thank you,
You as
Chair.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Meeting is adjourned.